Welcome to Compact Chat, episode 4. Today, we'll be talking about youth involvement in street gangs. So, this is an interesting topic. I actually just came back from Chicago for a gang specialist course, and I learned a lot. And Adam, I
Yeah.
know you've had some experience with the Alabama Gang Investors Association.
Yeah, I used to be the president of the Alabama Gang Investigators years ago. I'm Adam Schniper from Pelham PD, assigned to Compact. This is Jamelle Allen from Hoover PD, assigned to Compact. And that's a topic we want to go over because it is something that we run into with kids in our area. Just want to go up some of our more frequently asked questions we believe parents might want some information on.
Yeah.
Starting off, I think a big question I get from a lot of parents, if the topic is on the table, is there a gang presence in the Shelby County area and the surrounding areas?
Well, I would say absolutely. A lot of people think, when they hear the word gangs or street gangs, they think of these big cities, like Los
Right.
Angeles, Chicago, stuff like that. But they don't really realize that even in the smaller cities within Jefferson and Shelby County, we do have that influence, and it may not be as prominent as calling it a gang problem, but the influence is there, and you do have some kids who are attracted to that.
I agree. I don't think that I would not classify our county, being familiar in the past of counties all around Alabama, where there are examples in more rural areas of actually high concentrations of gang members. Right. And we know the large cities usually have that, but what do we do about our mid-level population counties and mid socioeconomic to upper, like Shelby County, Madison County, down into Baldwin County? There's not a county in Alabama, talking to law enforcement throughout the years, that has reported they have literally no gang activity at all. But I do think if we were to classify Shelby County, I think it is a very honest statement to say we are not a county that has a high involvement of kids in gangs.
Right.
So moving forward in the discussion, we're going to put that in perspective. We're not dealing, thank God, with some of the things that some of the larger cities are dealing with. But so problematic, I think, would be the word. We don't.
Right.
I would say we don't have a gang problem. I think law enforcement throughout the years has been very effective in Shelby County of, identifying and taking care of these things before they can turn into a larger problem. So I would just say sporadically problematic.
Yeah, I agree.
Which
with
is still
that.
a concern.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then we also have to look at, how close we are to other areas where the gang problem is more, is larger there in some of the areas. You know, so if you're in Hoover or Helena and you're right next to some other cities, where it's a bigger issue, you're going to have some of that migration, and some of those problems are going to spill into your cities or county as well. So you got to be aware of the issue.
Well, I don't know, you and I both have had kids from our jurisdictions that we find out have been hanging out in other cities.
Absolutely, yeah.
So their friend group, they may go to school down here, but their actual friend group is up into a different area.
Yeah.
And they are making friends and hanging out with gangs and then coming back down here and proclaiming that they're a gang member. And that's another discussion on how involved is your child. Is it just wanting to be wishful thinking, they're influenced by the lifestyle, or are they actually involved?
Right.
But, so anyway, moving forward on the conversation, just want to put that in perspective that we're not talking about a overwhelming problem in our area, but definitely something that still deserves discussion and awareness.
Right, I agree.
Next question, does it only occur in lower socioeconomic areas?
No, I would think that's a common misconception as well. I believe that's definitely a factor, in a lot of cases, especially when we talk about the larger cities, when you're dealing with inner city neighborhoods and the influences. But also, it's very attractive to these kids, even if they live in the more higher income communities. There's a movie that always comes to mind called Malibu's Most Wanted. It's about this kid from Malibu, California, living in a nice neighborhood, nice family. He actually travels to the inner city to become part of that lifestyle, because of how attractive it is. When we think about, even for us, like some of my favorite TV shows, like The Sopranos or what's the one with the motorcycle?
Oh, Sons of Anarchy.
Sons of Anarchy, yeah. Some of these my favorite shows, but really these are gangsters, right?
Yeah.
and we're rooting for the bad guys when we're watching these shows, and I'm a police officer, you know. So if that's attractive to me, imagine for a 13, 14-year-old kid who's playing Grand Theft Auto, where that's all gangs, or listening to certain music or certain movies that they're watching, that influence is there and how attractive that is for them.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter, the socioeconomic area.
No, it
It
doesn't.
doesn't matter
And-
as much as we think.
Well, in Shelby County, like all counties, we've got everything from very low income to very high income. And like you, I have seen kids in affluent neighborhoods. They want to live that life. They are attracted to it. They seek out and find those other friend groups, and yet they're going home to a $400,000 house.
Yeah.
Majority of the time, though, I do see kids that are coming from lower socioeconomic areas, but not necessarily poor. I know their families. They're hardworking. They have plenty of money, so they're not for want. I mean, there's food on the table. They're just not living, in an affluent neighborhood. But there's just no rhyme and reason to it. Sometimes it's just hard to draw. Again, we are not in an inner city environment the way the larger cities are. So we really don't. In my community, we don't have the public housing.
Yeah.
We don't have some of the issues, the lifestyle issues, the life issues that. Come with a lot of the problems along that. We're just so. It is interesting though. You've worked in a larger jurisdiction than I have. It's interesting being down here where it is a safer community, yet you still have kids that want to seek out that lifestyle, even though it's not part of the way they were raised. It's not a necessity.
Right.
As growing up in a particular neighborhood, there's some kids they don't know any different. That is the lifestyle as you grow up. So I've seen a lot of kids that had a lot offered to them, throw it away.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with that credibility. When we're talking about kids who may be from some of these more affluent type of neighborhoods, they want to be a part of this lifestyle, but you get no credibility being from certain areas where it's known to be real affluent.
Right.
So you can claim it all you want, but you got to have some ties to what they call the hood, right? So we've had cases and that we've dealt with in Compact where we've had young men and maybe even young women who've traveled to what we would describe as these inner cities or where these housing projects and places like that are, just to have that credibility. And when they take that reputation back to whether it's Pelham or Hoover or Helena or whatever, that gives them, that's their stamp. That's their stamp of approval, that credibility that they need.
Yeah.
And now they become, as we say, like a big dog where they're from because they travel to these other cities. And it may be family connections and things like that, but we got to keep in mind with social media and the internet, these kids, like you said earlier, they don't have to be only hanging out with kids from their school or from their city. They connect with people online. They're meeting up at sporting events. They're meeting up, hanging out. Somebody has a car, they're traveling. We've had plenty of cases like that where a kid, could be from Hoover and they're running away from home, ending up in Birmingham somewhere. So this is happening.
I had an interesting case years ago where we had a kid that claimed he wanted to be a gang member so bad.
Yeah.
And everybody laughed at him. The real gang members laughed at him. But he tried so hard. He he literally was inspired more than likely off the internet.
Right.
And he was literally claiming affiliation with major gangs all the way to New York City.
Wow.
Then he would flop to another one. He flopped to like 3 different gangs. But here's the reality. Everybody laughed at him until he struck it rich. Because he actually hit a real gang, became a member of a real gang, and he did have legal troubles due to his lifestyle he adopted. So, so again, we can go back to how they're raised and everything else, but there is an element of free will and an excitement that attracts a kid that says, this is the image I want. I don't want to be a soldier. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a cop. This is my image in society. I want to be feared. I want to be that gang member. And so that was a case where he wasn't even influenced by anyone next to him, no older gang members. He just woke him, said, this is what I'm going to do, and he was highly motivated to do it.
And he stuck to it
He
until
did.
he got to the point where he was actually accepted by actual gang members. And like you said, it's somebody who had no connections to, this national gang, but just through his research online, he found the right people. And that's why we want to have this conversation to make you all aware. I mean, your kid may stay at home, but with the internet, they have access to the world. You know, and so as parents, we'll talk about that a little later, what parents can do to protect themselves and protect their youth or their children from getting caught up in this.
What is the youngest age we see kids in our area becoming involved? Because I know in some of the larger cities, it can be at a very, very young age.
Right, yeah. From my research in some of the larger cities, you can see anywhere from 11 to 12 years old, you know.
Correct.
But I would say, just from my experience, that's pretty accurate even within our jurisdictions. Somewhere around 12, 13 years old. Middle school age is more than likely when they're going to be exposed and start having these ideas of either forming some type of group or being influenced by some type of group that's connected to these street gangs. Would you
I
agree with
agree. I think middle school is the youngest. I would not say full-fledged gang members, but
Right.
they are starting to group up. They are starting with some petty crime. They are starting to have a gang mindset.
Yeah.
I don't think that the older ones in the communities are willing to bring in someone that young right off the bat. I think they're watching them from a distance.
Yeah.
By the time they make it to high school, though, they have named their group. They have, and a lot of times, affiliated with a national gang organization, and they have become a real gang, even though at a juvenile level. And give it a couple more years, and we've got kids that have graduated high school that were in that gang who are bringing in the younger ones. So we do have a little bit of a pipeline every now and then, depending on what part of the county you're living in.
Yeah, I've had 8th graders hanging out with high schoolers and becoming more part of that group the older they got. So I would say probably higher middle school age, like, 8th grade, something like that, is when they're really
I
starting
usually
to get more
14,
involved.
15 years old, beginning actual gang involvement,
right.
and then 16, 17, 18 and on, absolutely, already in.
Active. Yeah, I agree with that.
And that kind of ties into this next question. Are adults orchestrating recruitment into the gangs? What have you seen in this area?
Well, I think historically we have seen that, and a lot of the reasons are because if you can recruit younger members, the younger members are going to be less likely to get serious charges if they get caught. Also, they're going to be a lot more impressionable. They're going to do some things without even thinking about it, where you ask a grown man or somebody older to do it, they're going to ask questions. Where a young man or a young woman who's just trying to belong, no questions asked. You're older, you're OG or whatever. They're just going to do what you want them to do. So I think that plays a huge part in it, and one of the reasons that we do see that these older members recruiting younger, because they're easier to manipulate.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. I've seen older people recruit younger members, but more often than not, what I've seen throughout the past 15 years is the phenomenon I mentioned with the kids in middle school, kind of grouping up, petty crimes, just feeling that belonging with each other, and then they actually create a gang, or they're brought in underneath an existing gang. But again, it's almost like they're just self-motivated, just like that individual I mentioned. So I have seen it where adults are orchestrating things, but again, this area is a little bit different than some of the large cities. And I have seen where the kids are self-motivated to create the gang. There was no adult anywhere beyond the age of 18 or 19. It was fully orchestrated by the kids themselves.
That makes sense, yeah.
It did not make them a lesser gang. Some of them went on to actually commit very heinous crimes, but it was just I've seen it both ways. Older folks orchestrating it, but a lot of times I've seen them just create it.
No, that makes sense. I mean, when you look at the history of, and I'm sure it's fine for us to mention some of the national gangs like the Bloods and the Crips that everybody talks about. The history of the Crips, there were no older guys. These were all 14, 15-year-olds who started it, and they didn't need that older influence. But like you said, it started with them, and it grew from there. And as they got older, they became the OGs or the older guys. But it started off with just a bunch of young kids, wanting to belong to something.
Well, and I guess to put it in a basic form, yes, we have older people as the puppet masters of some of these things, absolutely, and they're huge organizations nationwide. But more often than not, what I've seen is there is no puppet master. It is the kids feeding off of each other, so it's different. It just depends on what's going on during the year. Every year's a little bit different in this area. There's something new comes about and something old dies out. Next question. Why are kids attracted to the gang lifestyle? And I think we've already kind of touched on this.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that already. When we talked about the sense of belonging, the respect. We all want to be a part of something. I'm a police officer. That's our own fraternity. You see a brother in blue. We all have certain codes and morals that we live by. And if we lose one of our brothers in blue, we all feel it, even if we didn't know that person. And people join the military, you know, as we mentioned, fraternities and stuff like that. That sense of belonging, it plays a big part. And also, it may be for respect, you know, maybe even protection in some cases. You know, some people feel like if I join a gang, you know, no one will mess with me anymore. No one will bully me anymore. So you gotta look at stuff like that. That sense of belonging to a family. You know, if it's a situation where they may not have that family connection at home, they may look for it in the streets.
Right. What crimes do we typically see gangs exposing the kids in this area to?
Well, I think it can be all over the place. You know, it may start off with some petty things like when I was growing up. You know, there was a certain group where you had to steal a bike. You know, to be a member of their crew. You know, and people would leave their bikes outside, and poor Johnny would come out. His bike is gone. You know, not knowing that this was a whole initiation ritual going on. But you hear different stuff, you know, in some of the bigger cities, the more national gangs, you know, it may be violence as big as, you know, assault with a weapon or even murder in some cases in order to join. But it may start off, you know, drug dealing or vape dealing as we're dealing with now, or some more petty crimes, breaking in cars, you know, things like that. Or even just the use of these drugs, you know what I mean? It may just be, okay, introducing their friends or their members to smoking weed or drinking alcohol and things like that as a way of like bringing them in or being part of the group. You know, you're not, but a lot of the times you're not really part of the crew until you commit some type of crime,
right?
Or you know, you're doing some type of activity that is illegal, like drinking or smoking or something like that. So.
I think at the high school level, we've typically seen the car break-ins. Absolutely, car break-ins. Absolutely, drug dealing. And typically cannabis. I'm sure there's other things, but my own knowledge has been real heavy on marijuana sales, and usually the sales are orchestrated by an adult. There's somebody on a neighborhood level that is. I'm not saying they put them to work, but there's definitely someone that they more so answer to. But yeah, that and what I have seen though, I have seen our kids graduate our school systems in this area. And it's been petty crime, and they have absolutely ended up in the newspaper for wanted for murder. We've seen that. We've seen some of the kids murdered. And that's some of them before they even made it out of high school. And again, this goes back to, this is not to say that this is happening in Highway 31 running through Pelham or Hoover or Alabaster. This is what we talked about earlier, where the kids are purposely to hang with that group. We don't have that level of activity going on in our area. You've got to go to the larger city to hang with those kids, and when they're getting there, that's when they're being shot at. They are shooting at people, and it's full on what you would categorize as gang violence.
Absolutely, and I would also add to that, you know, although it's not as prominent as some of the bigger cities, we've had sporadic situations, like you said, where you know there may be a shooting in an apartment complex or at a fast food restaurant or at a gas station, and it's tied to these types of groups. You know, these young men
having a beef with each other or something.
Exactly.
What signs can parents look for, as far as if their child was gang involved versus just regular teenage behavior?
Well, I would look at changes in their behavior, their language. You know, if you're noticing certain signs or certain language being used, being scribbled on notebooks, or you know, or their notes and stuff like that, they're spelling a lot of things with just using C's instead of B's, or you know, just stuff like that. That may be something to look out for. What kind of music they're listening to. They're starting to like certain artists based on certain gang affiliations that these artists may have. They're dressing a certain way, you know, avoiding certain colors, you know, or being more prominent with certain colors. Just notice their lifestyle changes. You know, who are their new friend group? Who are they hanging out with? Are they more secretive about who they're hanging out with? You know, or what they're doing when they are hanging out. You know, these may be signs that we probably need to look a little closer and make sure that it's not something like this that they're getting involved with.
Yeah. What can parents do to offset a teen's attraction to a gang lifestyle?
I think it starts with having open, honest dialogue. You know. When it comes to stuff like this, we got to make sure that we're not looking at it as taboo, you know, or something that, oh, this will never happen to my kid. Be honest and have these conversations. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're playing video games, they know about gangs. Period. You know, so it's even if the conversation just turns into, oh, mom or dad, I would never get involved in something like that. But at least you're opening that door and maintaining the opportunity for open dialogue. I would also try to get them involved in some type of activity where they wouldn't have a need to look for any type of belonging in the streets, you know,
Right.
the sports or church groups or even just doing things with the family. You know, if they don't have that unnecessary free time or just that boredom where they're just looking for something, you know, then that makes them less likely to end up, you know, headed in this direction. So
Right.
I think it's good to just give them that sense of belonging at home, you know, keep them involved in something where they're meeting people, like-minded people in a positive manner, you know, and they don't have a need to look outside of that, you know, and possibly influence in this negative way.
Well, and I would add a good male influence, and that's something we talked about, the socioeconomic correlation between gang activity. But I would say there's an absolute correlation where I think most of the kids I've dealt with over the years did come from a single mom, multiple siblings, working all the time, and in all truth, they've got a roof over the kid's head, but they're doing the best they can, and they may not be able to give them the attention. They have to give all the siblings attention equally. It's not an exact science to it, but I've noticed that a lot of single moms, and with the absences, are absentee fathers. And I don't mean I don't mean divorce. These fathers are not in their life whatsoever. They have abandoned the family. So going to that, you know, what can we do to offset it if there is a parent that's got these worries, you know, then that would be something. If there is someone, an uncle or someone at a church or even at the school, get with the school, maybe one of the teachers, but, you know, have that conversation with an adult saying, look, I'm worried about my kid. I think they're starting to fall in with a bad crowd. I can't fill that void of the father. He has left this child a long time ago. Can you step up? Can you just have an additional dialogue and mentor my child? And the more mentors surrounding a child, you know, we say here at Compact is you put as many protective factors 360 degrees around a child. So I think look at your protective factors for your child and absolutely do whatever you can to either get them enrolled in a mentor program or at least have a family friend step up and kind of mentor a little extra.
So adding on to that, like I said, if they were to ask, how can Compact assist a family that's dealing with the teen leaning towards that lifestyle? I think you kind of just answered that. But at that point, will we want to step in as the mentors?
Yeah, and I think that's, and we have had some parents. We are not a gang unit. We are but we are a youth behavioral unit, which does center around a lot around substance use. But we do have parents. What I've seen with Compact over the years, the parent brings the child to Compact, have a dialogue with us to formulate an action plan for the family. And when we have, what we find out is that the parent's aware that they're smoking cannabis or they're drinking, but it turns out the child has actually become gang involved as well. And it doesn't happen very often, but we have had kids come in here who were about to become, they were at the stages of becoming gang involved at one level or another. And there was definitely a nexus with substance abuse. So what can we do? What can we do any different than what we do for helping families? I think this is the exact same thing. This is a behavioral issue. If a family wants to call us and wants to talk to us, we're going to treat them no different. Whatever the problem is, it's a behavioral issue. And our job is to give them that support and help them develop an action plan. You know, what are things you have not tried? What are things we can offer you? Are there any community organizations that we work alongside that would benefit you taking part in some of their programs as well? So resource finding.
Connect them with the resources.
So we're not, in my opinion, I don't think we're going to look at a family bringing a child in that's gang involved any different than we're going to look at a child who's having a mental wellness challenge or is involved in substance use.
Yeah, so thank you for that, and I think that pretty much sums up our discussion for today. We thank you all for taking the time and listening. If you guys have any questions or want to give any feedback, feel free to reach out to us here on social media or our website, compact2020.com. Again, this is Investigator Jamelle Allen, Hoover PD.
Adam Schniper. Thanks, guys.
Thank y'all.